The helminths are parasitic worms, all of them. Okay? So these are versions of parasitic worms. Now in your head you might be thinking, okay, it's a worm. You can see it. And you would be right. Okay? These are the only multicellular, sort of large eukaryotic organism that we're talking about. Okay? And a lot of them, in fact the majority of them, you can see with the naked eye. So why are we including them in here? Because none of you are in the woods going, oh look, tapeworms, let me lick those. Right? If you've been doing that, stop it. Okay? If we learned nothing, I've said it before, don't lick things in the woods. Okay? Alright? Because most of these are going to be included with the microorganisms, because if you acquire them, you probably acquire them as a microscopic version of the organism. You got helminth eggs, okay? Or you ingested helminths that were in a cyst, okay? Not a large, visible, active helminth, okay? These will include tapeworms, flukes, and roundworms, okay? Most of them are not going to be parasitic, okay? They're just natural inhabitants of the soil or the water, and they get picked up, okay, by humans. Okay. Those that are parasitic somehow has been a part of their life cycle. They take a portion of their lives in our GI tract. So what that means is most of the time we get them because we ate them. Okay. We get them because we somehow ingested an egg. Okay. Now, I will go through some in a little bit that are acquired through a bite. Okay. But they usually pass through the intestines or pass through the GI tract on their way to somewhere else. Okay. We know of about 50 species of helminths that parasitize humans. Okay. Don't get up on your high horse about these. We find them everywhere in the world. Okay. People think, I'm not getting this. I live in America. Nobody gets worms here. You are wrong. Okay. The highest incidences are going to be in the tropical areas because, again, heat, more types of organisms, more types of insects, etc. Okay. Yearly estimates of cases are going to be in the billions. Okay. Not confined to any type of developing nation. Okay. A conservative estimate that there are about 50 million helminthic infections in North America alone. So that includes us. Okay. So we do see helminthic infections actually involving typical people. Honestly, it's usually kids, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So your major groups of helminths, okay, are going to include two categories, what we call flatworms. Okay. The phylum on here is Helminthes. Guys, I don't need you to know that. Okay. I will not make you memorize the crazy scientific names for these. Okay. I'm going flatworms, roundworms. Okay. So the flatworms, okay, long, thin, flat bodies. Okay. We divide them into two categories. The tapeworms, okay, also known as cestodes, okay, and flukes, also known as trematodes. But I'm just going to call them tapeworms and flukes. Okay. The roundworms, which come from a phylum called Helminthes, okay, are also known as nematodes, and they are exactly what it states. They're rounded instead of being squished flat. So here's your typical flatworm. Okay. This is a tapeworm. Okay. It's a cartoonized version of a tapeworm. Okay. Nice and long. It's got these flat sort of segments to its body. Okay. And on one end, on the head, we call it the skull legs, chances are you will see what we call suckers. Okay. They're exactly what you think they are. Their job is suction cup to a part of the body. Suction cup to the host. Okay. Usually tapeworms we find living in the intestinal tract. Okay. They can get extremely long, okay, because wherever they suction on, they've got the rest of the intestines to go. Anybody remember how much intestines you've got? It's like 23 feet. Okay. It's a lot. It's over 20 feet of intestine. Okay. So these guys can just sort of wind their way through your intestinal tract. Okay. This is an image of an actual tapeworm that was pulled out of intestines. The centimeter bar right here means this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 centimeters. So this guy's about this long. Okay. It's a pretty big tapeworm. Okay. Obviously, the bigger the organism, the bigger the tapeworm usually. Like, we get like huge ones out of like cows. Okay. The other flatworm we were talking about are the flukes. Okay. This is an example of a fluke. They're going to be much smaller. Okay. And in the cartoonized drawing, you'll notice they have an oral sucker and usually a ventral sucker. So they actually suck in blood. Okay. Usually we see flukes sucking blood. Okay. They're going after some type of fluid. So they've got a primitive sort of intestinal tract in there. The ventral suckers to help them get stuck on. Okay. Most commonly we see things like liver flukes, lung flukes. Well, liver and lungs, we see brain flukes. Those are places that get a lot of blood. Get a lot of blood circulating through there. So they'll suction on and then basically move blood in. Honestly, most people say they look like a leech. They kind of act like leeches too. Okay. These are known as having leaf-shaped bodies, is what it's called, because they're not usually very long. Okay. Instead, they're kind of small organisms. Okay. The roundworms, okay, will not be flat. Okay. The roundworms are nice and rounded. They're going to look like spaghetti noodles or lo mein noodles. Interestingly, the roundworms usually come in multiple sexes. So there will be female and male roundworms as opposed to the flatworms, which are usually hermaphroditic. Okay. They can have sexes, but they're usually hermaphroditic. Okay. So they don't necessarily need a partner, okay, to make more worms. Here we usually see males and females, with females being much larger than the males because they're in charge of reproduction. Okay. These will normally have some type of mouth and some type of anus. So they're actually ingesting food. Whereas the flatworms didn't have a mouth and they're very flat because what they're doing is basically bringing food in across the membrane to the outside. It's this cuticle to the outside of the worm, and being flat gives them a lot of space to absorb nutrients into the body. Okay. All right. So I usually don't do a whole lot of this, but I'm going to mention it. Okay. Again, these are multicellular organisms. Okay. They're going to have organs and organ systems. The most developed organ system they have, the most complex thing that they've got is going to be the reproductive system. Okay. That's not uncommon. Okay. Because almost every organism out there is highly dependent upon making more organisms. Okay. When the species to survive, you got to make more. Okay. So reproduction is going to be a big deal for these guys. Okay. The complete life cycle normally includes a fertilized egg, a larva, which will be like a juvenile, like an infant, okay, and then adult stages of the worms. Okay. The adults are going to take nutrients out of their host body and reproduce sexually within the host. Okay. Like I said earlier, the roundworms, okay, will have separate sexes. Okay. The flukes, okay, they can have separate sexes or be hermaphroditic. The flatworms, more often than not, are hermaphroditic. Okay? So they'll have both female and male reproductive organs. Okay. So when we look at the helminths and the life cycles that they have, okay, To be a parasite, okay, they have to be transmitted in some type of infective form. Okay. Transmission is going to be either picking up an egg or larvae. Again, because none of us are in the woods like, let me eat this worm. Okay. Even desperate measures, y'all. Even if you start, pick something else. Pick a leaf. Don't go in the woods and eat worms. Okay. Okay. The host in which the larva develops is known as the intermediate host. So the host where adulthood happens, okay, is considered an intermediate host. Okay. Mating occurs in what we call a definitive host. Okay. It's your end host because the end game is make more worms. Okay. Right. Now, there will be a question on the test, example. Is this the definitive host? Which one is the intermediate host? Which one is the definitive host? Okay. Most commonly, we see people acquiring these from contaminated food, soil, or water. So it's, again, something they've ingested. It's usually oral. Okay. So let's try it. Okay. This is an example of a helminthic disease. This particular one is actually passed, okay, by the bite of what's called a black fly. Okay. So we see the black fly bite the human. That means this helminth has two hosts, black flies and humans. It spends part of its life in one and part of its life in the other. Okay. So black fly bites the human, okay, dumps in a bunch of larvae. Okay. These juvenile organisms. Okay. The larvae grow up to adulthood. We see these nodules, okay, where the worms are sort of clustered in one part of the body. Okay. The adult worms mate, okay, and then thousands of brand new worms are now going to be in this individual. Okay. Symptoms from the worms actually moving throughout the body. We see skin rashes, skin depigmentation. These are also often termed African eye worms because once the worms make their way into the eyes, we see the blindness start to happen. Okay? It's called river blindness or onchocerciasis. These flies are found near a river called Onchocerca. Okay? So we named it after the river where the flies are found. Okay? What happens is the black fly picks up new larvae, okay, from a host. Right? The larvae, all right, begin to sort of develop in the black fly, and they go out and bite a new host. Okay? So, definitive host is where what happens? Mating. So who's the definitive host? The human. Okay? That means we can call the black fly the what? The intermediate host. Okay? Just figure out where they mate. Okay? Definitive and mating go together. Anything else would be intermediate. Okay? They might be growing up, they might be getting bigger, okay, but they're not mating. Okay? Some organisms only have one host. If they only have one host, that host is the definitive host. Okay? If it's passed from human to human, okay, there's only one type of host. Humans are the definitive host. There is no intermediate. There's nothing that passes it from one human to the next. Most of the time we see helminths lay eggs. All right. Fertilized eggs will get released out into the environment. Okay. They've got this nice protective shell, just like any other egg. Okay. Nice protective shell, lots of food inside. Okay. But they are vulnerable. Okay. We can kill the eggs with chemicals, heat. Okay. Sometimes the eggs are preyed upon, and so there are other smaller organisms that will actually eat the helminthic eggs. Okay. Helminths will commonly lay anywhere from 200,000 to 25 million eggs in a day. So we're not just getting one or two of them that we're dealing with. It's a lot. Okay? That's because helminths take what I call the shotgun approach to parenting. Okay? They do. Right. And if has anybody done Bio 102? Okay. If you do Bio 102, it's the second part of like general biology. We talk about things like K-selected species and J-selected species, and how some organisms have like 1 or 2 babies and they take really good care of them. And they make sure they become adults. Okay. And then other organisms just go, you know what? We're going to throw 8 million of them out there and hopefully a couple of them make it. Okay. That's what these guys are doing. Okay? They don't have time to take care of their young, so they throw millions of eggs out into the environment and go, some of them have got to make it. If I make millions of them, some of them have got to grow to adulthood. Okay? Right? This ensures that, they've made it, okay, to the next generation, that they've had organisms make it to the next generation. But there's a little bit of a problem with this. Okay? For the most part, these guys don't want to lay 25 million eggs inside of their new host. Okay? Because if you lay 25 million helminth eggs inside of a human and have 25 million new helminths, now you've got a lot of competition for food. Right? You're running out of space, you start running out of food, okay? And it can kill off the host. That could be really bad and actually kill the host. These guys don't want to kill the host. That's their home. Okay. Why would you? Nobody buys a house and burns it down, right? Okay, unless you're committing insurance fraud, and don't do that. Okay. But that's not the goal. You don't buy a house or build yourself a house and then go, let's tear the whole thing down. Okay. Instead, most of the time, helminths will lay eggs that are going to be removed from the host somehow. So that being in the intestinal tract is useful, because pretty much every day you're guaranteed that there's some type of elimination event. Okay? That there's some type of event that's going to bring those eggs out of the host. Okay? So you see lots of times eggs actually coming out in fecal matter. Okay? Possibly even live worms, okay, that have already kind of hatched coming out in fecal matter. Get them to a new host is the goal. Okay. So there are a couple of examples of this, and this chart you can actually find in your book. Okay. Filariasis. Okay, the host requirement is humans, and we see these being in the soil. Okay. These guys have multiple hosts of piggles, the trichina worm, okay, and Trichinella spiralis. We see people get it from pigs. Okay. Pork that's undercooked, that hasn't actually killed the larvae as they're wound up inside of the pork. You can also find it in bear if you eat bear. Okay. We don't usually see it in cattle. Okay. All right. Guinea worm, like I said, these are great. Okay. If you wanted to pick something that was definitely in the book. Okay. These are good examples of those eukaryotic organisms. The pork tapeworms, fish tapeworms. There's some that are, the blood fluke right here, and snails. Okay. So you start asking questions like, how do people get stuff from snails? Okay. And the answer is not by eating them. And I'm going to leave it at that.
They eat them in France.
They do eat them in France, but these are actually freshwater snails, and you do not pick up the worm from eating the snail. Most commonly, it's picked up a different way, and I'm going to leave it at that, because somebody will tell us about it in the discussion post. I'm sure. Okay. Honestly, biggest example, and the one we see the most in the U.S. is going to be pinworms. Okay. Also known as seed worms. Okay. And who do we see get this? Kids. Okay. Okay. Pinworms and seed worms caused by a roundworm called Enterobius vermicularis. Okay. And you know your kids have this because one day you look over and see them and they're doing what? Scratching. Scratching where? Scratching their behinds. Okay? So you look over, and you're like, what are you doing? And they're like, it itches. Okay? And kids can't control themselves, can they? Okay? They can't control themselves. And they do that, and you go wash your hands. What are you doing? And you send your child to the bathroom to wash their hands. And there's a problem with that, because have you seen a child wash their hands? That's the magic of soap. Clean. There was no back. They didn't get the back. They didn't get underneath. They didn't get in between. Okay, they went, look, clean hands. Okay. The problem is then your child is at daycare with everybody else's child. Okay, right? And they've scratch, barely clean their hands. Okay, or nobody saw it. And they play with the Legos. And they play with the Barbies. Okay, and they eat lunch together. Okay, and they touch everything. They love each other. And you're like, look at them. They're so cute, hugging each other, high-fiving, wiping their noses. Okay. Our issue is these eggs are swallowed. Okay. The eggs get swallowed or picked up from a person or picked up from the Legos, and then everybody goes and eats their peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay. And then those eggs get swallowed. They make their way to the intestines and hatch. Okay. Larvae become adults within about a month, and then they start reproducing. Okay. And when they start reproducing, they don't want to fill up your child. They don't want to have competition for all the food and the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches your kid's sending. Okay. So the female, to lay her eggs, actually migrates down to the anus, comes out at night, and lays eggs around the perianal region. Okay. Well, those eggs have this great sticky coating so that they'll stick to stuff and get picked up by other humans. And that sticky coating itches. And so all those eggs and your kids' little fingers, and now they touched everything in the house. Ooh. Oh my gosh. Or if they're like mine, they do weird things like, let me count your teeth. And you're like, oh man. Okay. So these eggs get moved from one human to the next, brothers, sisters, mom, dad. Okay. And the whole thing starts over. They make their way into the intestinal tract. The next thing you know, you look over and dad's like, what's going on? Okay. And, well, I'm pretty sure everybody in the house now has pinworms. Okay. It's not uncommon for people to take their kids in to the doctor and get diagnosed with pinworms, and the doctor just say, all right, we're going to give everybody in the house an anti-helminthic. Okay. We're going to give everybody in the house drugs to clear this up. And everybody's going to have to take it. If not, you're just going to keep spreading it back and forth. Okay. So scratching ends up kind of spreading the eggs around. This will make its way through a daycare center in a heartbeat. Because like I said, everybody touches the Legos. Everybody shares the crayons. Okay. I've made my children paranoid. I will tell you that. They're like, I had to Germ-X. Somebody sneezed in class. And I'm like, I know. That's okay, baby. You Germ-X. It's fine. Okay. Okay. Right. Another example. Okay. This one's another roundworm. It's pretty uncommon. Okay. Elephantiasis. Okay. Now we've sort of moved away from that term, and it's a little bit more commonly called lymphatic filariasis. Okay. It's caused by a roundworm called Wuchereria bancrofti. Okay. And these guys are passed by mosquito. Okay. So the mosquito ends up being the intermediate host, okay, passing from human to human. Okay. What happens is the adults actually eventually make their way to the lymphatic system. Okay. You guys remember the lymphatic system? Kind of runs along right beside all of your blood vessels. It's moving lymph around, okay, helping do things like remove fluids and put white blood cells places. Okay. These end up in the lymphatic system, and what they'll do is make their way to a lymph node, call it home, and then reproduce. Okay. Unfortunately, their little baby, their little filaria worms, don't make their way out of the body. Okay. So we get little bundles of filarial worms, okay, that actually end up blocking off lymphatic ducts. Okay. This growth or overall enlargement, okay, of the lower extremities actually has to do with the fact that those worms are stuck in those inguinal lymph nodes, those inguinal lymphatic ducts. You remember those lymph nodes that run right here? Okay. So we get all these worms that are stuck and blocking the duct, so you can't move any fluid back up to the rest of the body. So lymph ends up down in the lower extremities and it doesn't get brought back up. Okay? So all of this is fluid that builds up over time. Okay? Now usually the question I get is, why would you let it get this bad? Well, in America, where we have access to healthcare, we wouldn't. If your leg started to look like this, where would you go? You'd be right at the fast ER care at the doctor. Okay? But go to developing nations where it is a 10-mile walk to the clinic, and now you've waited because it's a 10-mile walk to the clinic, okay, and your legs are swollen like this, okay, so that 10-mile walk is going to take you days, and by the time you get there, they might be out of the medication that you really, really need. Okay? Anti-helminthics, they run out of them pretty quickly. Right? And so you got to walk back, you got to keep coming back and forth, back and forth. So this isn't particularly uncommon in developing nations. Okay? We've seen the incidence lower. Okay? We don't see it as much, okay, because we've sort of spread, okay, the drugs around to actually get this to go away, or have done a better job of identifying it early on, but it does still happen. Okay. If you look in these regions, we say these are endemic countries, so it's common, okay, in these particular places. So, Eastern South America, Brazil, okay, Central Africa, we see it in India. And believe it or not, that is the end of chapter 4. Yeah, you did it.